morning. Last week we spoke about some things that were found in 1 Corinthians. It's such a beautiful chapter. I'd like to talk about the last half of it today. There's many more special things that we can find there. And starting in verse 8, we have a neat verse that says, "Prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless or pass away, but love will last forever." Last week we talked about that agape love and what it meant, and the fact of how much more important it is than any of those other things. And just letting us soak that in for a minute. Love will last forever. More than prophecy, languages, special knowledge, we're not going to need those. And when we think about how love is going to last forever, the reason for that is because it's part of God's character. In 1 John we read that God is love, and that anyone who does not love does not know God, because He is love. And that's so beautiful. But you know, if we're really honest, sometimes that's hard to understand, because there's so much suffering and so much injustice in this world. And you know, people that are not Christians or who are struggling with faith get a real problem with this. I'm sure you've heard it said, you know, how could God be a loving God and let this happen to this person? Those are such hard things, and they're hard for us, and we don't have answers. And of course faith comes in there, and that's what God said, we need to have faith when we don't have answers. And yet we struggle, and I think that's a natural thing to do. And Paul knew that. He talked about his own struggles. And he goes on in verse 9 to explain a little bit more about why that's true. He said, "Now our knowledge is partial and incomplete, and even the gift of prophecy only reveals part of the whole picture. But when the time of perfection comes," that's the future in eternity in heaven, "these partial things will disappear." And then he uses an analogy. He said, "When I was a child, I spoke and thought like a child. I reasoned like a child." And once again, I have to say, those of us with children, grandchildren, they're fun to watch and listen to, just to see how that plays out and think we're God's children. And we have a lot of the same things going on in our minds, even if we don't want to say them out loud. But he goes on and said, "When I grew up, I put away childish things." And that's what's going to happen to us as we grow up and get beyond this world, and we can see again everything clearly. And then he has this neat verse that follows, verse 12. "Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity." And I think right there we need to stop and look at that verse, because actually we have wonderful mirrors that show everything. I mean, incredible stuff, and all the telescopes that they've got and all the lenses. I mean, it's like, what are you talking about we can't see in a mirror? So this is where a little bit of history is pretty interesting, because mirrors back in his day were usually made of bronze or copper or silver or other metals. And bronze mirrors had very low reflectivity and poor color rendering. So you really couldn't see very well. It was like through a glass darkly. And they did start using glass in the first century. It's possible that it was happening somewhere around Paul. But even then, what they were doing is putting this glass on top of lead forms. And so it was a very imprecise process, and the mirrors had dim reflection. I enjoyed reading about this mirror thing. It turns out it was 1,000 years after that, before, well, actually 1,500 years after that, before we started getting mirrors that were more decent. So we've come a long way since then. So the analogy holds what Paul's saying. Looking through a bronze mirror, as a mirror, what can you see? Not much. It's cloudy, it's fuzzy. And then he says, that's how our knowledge is. "All that I know now is partial and incomplete." So we don't have answers. And then he says something wonderful. He says, "Then I will know everything completely," and I love this, "just as God now knows me completely." God doesn't have that mirror. He's not limited like we are. He's not even in time. He's outside of it. He sees that big picture. He sees every hurt we've got, every injustice, and it hurts him too. And yet, because of the bigger picture of what we can't see, he's working in that, and he's using that. And sometimes he gives us glimpses of things because there are healings, there are good things that come from bad things, and we can see him working. And so it's not all just a mystery. And I thought at this point I'd like to share an experience from my life of a time that God worked in a special way. And this goes back to when I was at Indiana University working on a master's degree in piano performance. And I happened to have a piano instructor who was a very nice lady, a very polished, fine musician. Universities like that tend to hire their piano instructors based on their careers and their performance, not their teaching ability. But this lovely lady had two sides. She had the side that she revealed in public, or when we were having a group workshop class and playing for each other, and especially if parents or visitors came, she was charming, just the epitome of niceness. But in the room where the lessons were, she was someone else. She was very cutting. She really liked to just destroy confidence in the remarks that she said. And I actually held up fairly well for a while, but it began to get to me, and I started to lock up. I just couldn't play. And she commented on that. She said, "You're just frozen." And I also knew there were 3 other students that had really had difficulty with her. They actually left the program and went to another university. And I understood one locked up so much and became so tight they couldn't even play anymore. It was very destructive what she was doing, but nobody saw it. And I reached a point I didn't think I could go on. And so I remember the day I was sitting on the couch trying to call my parents just to let them know the news that I was going to have to drop out of the program. Moving to some other university was not an option at that time. And the call wouldn't go through. I must have tried 20 minutes dialing their number, and I never got through. And then, as I sat on that couch, it was an inside voice, not an audible, but it was a voice that said to me, "I'm healing you, you will make it." And I felt that warmth flood me. And I never made the call. I didn't need to. And when I went back for my next lesson, she said to me, "Oh, it's your incredible spirit and strength of will has healed you." I knew she didn't really know, but God did. And I was able to continue and finish the degree and go on. And God does do those things for us. Those little things that show us He's working. And it's wonderful to have those mixed in with the ones that we don't understand. I'm sure your life has some too. And I just want to praise and thank Him that my music could continue so that I can honor Him with it. So let's just keep our eyes on Him. And remember, it's okay if we don't understand, because we will someday. And His love is now and forever, and it's complete, and it's ours if we ask Him for it. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, we know we don't understand a lot. Thank you for the good times, and thank you for the times you touch our hearts and lives in special ways. And we know you're there. But let us trust you in the times we don't see that happening, because you're still there, and you're still love. And you have everything in your charge, and you see the bigger picture that we don't. May we just rest and trust in you. In Jesus' name, amen.